Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the show WandaVision. Fun fact, in episode 7, when Wanda is talking to the director of her show behind the camera, that voice that is speaking is actually Kathryn Hahn's voice, but it's in a deeper pitch. And Kathryn Hahn, who we come to find out is playing Agatha Harkness. This show came out in 2021 and stars Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, and Kathryn Hahn, and was created by Jack Schaffer. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. WandaVision tells the story of Wanda Maximoff and her husband, Vision, who moved to this small town called Westview. When we first meet them, it looks like this show is going to be paying homage to different sitcoms throughout the years, and that it's just going to be a fun little show. We are introduced to their neighbor Agnes, and then we later come to meet their twin boys that they have. And we also see the return of her brother Pietro, who comes to visit. Even with all this, there are some small things that are still off. The main thing being that Vision has already been destroyed and her brother Pietro was killed already. We come to find out that Wanda has created this hex, and within this hex is Wanda's perfect little world that we're seeing play out. On the outside of this hex, we see the return of some familiar faces, in which we see FBI agent Wu, who we haven't seen since Ant-Man and the Wasp, who is searching for a person who was in his protective custody. We meet Monica Rambeau, who we saw in Captain Marvel, even though now she's a little bit more grown up, who is a agent for SWORD, which was created by her mother. And then we see the return of Darcy Lewis, who is now a doctor of astrophysics, who we last saw in Thor Dark World, and she is there to bring a new perspective. As the story progresses, we learn a little bit more about what's going on with Wanda, and we're introduced to the head of SWORD, who we think has good intentions, but come to find out that he actually does not have good intentions for Wanda. Now we see Wanda must not only fight for her life, but she also needs to come to terms with her past and her grief. Let's talk about the A-list talent that they got for this show. You have Elizabeth Olsen, who was in Ingrid Goes West. Paul Bettany was in Priest. Kathryn Hahn, who was in Mrs. Fletcher. Tiana Paris was in Dear White People. Kat Dennings was in Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlists. Randall Park was in Fresh Off the Boat. And Evan Peters was in American Horror Story. The show was created by Jack Schaffer, who wrote Captain Marvel. I think there was a lot of speculation about who was going to appear in this show and what the show was going to be about. But I think the show made it very clear that the show is about what's in the title. It's about Wanda and Vision. Throughout the show, we do see some people that come back from other shows, but the main purpose of this show is to figure out what's happening with Wanda post Endgame, but also figuring out how is Vision back, considering he was destroyed in Avengers Infinity War. It was interesting to see how all these fan theories came about Mephisto being in the show and Reed Richards and Doctor Strange possibly being in the show. You know, I fed into them for a little bit, but in the end, I'm glad that they were just theories. I really liked how with WandaVision, we got to focus mainly on just Wanda and how she quite literally built her own perfect world. The show's main villain is actually grief, but I feel like Agatha is there as like a bonus. Let me just start off by saying that Miss Wanda Maximoff has been through it. Like, she has lost everyone that has been close to her, and people are shocked that she is depressed and that her powers are a little out of control right now. And instead of trying to help her, they see her as, a villain. And it was interesting to see how this comes about in this show. But I think that, she definitely needs some help. And I think that in this show, we just see how people were portraying her as the villain. And while there were some things in this show that she did that weren't hero-like. I think that a lot of stuff that happened was very unintentional. I thought it was interesting how this show basically showed the stages of grief. From the time that we've seen Wanda in the MCU, she has known nothing but pain. We see the death of her brother. We see how she accidentally blows up a building and kills people. We see the death of Vision. And all of this kind of comes to a head in this show, and she finally has to come face to face with it. By the end of the show, we see her starting this healing process after having all of these years of so much hurt. I think that Elizabeth Olsen deserves an Emmy for this role. She was perfect as Wanda. She not only embodied Wanda portraying these different characters from different time periods, but in the end, she also portrayed the sadder side of Wanda, who now has to come face to face with her past and is learning a little bit more about her own grief. It was interesting to see how she was able to switch from doing all these sitcoms and these funny upbeat characters to moving on to a person who finally has to come to terms with all of the loss that she's already experienced. It was interesting to see her take on all these sitcoms, and it was cool how they were based off of real sitcoms. As I was watching, though, I can always feel that something was wrong within each of the episodes. It was really interesting to see how by the end of the show, how her perfect little world that she created was now falling apart. Also, the Scarlet Witch reveal was perfect. I've always known that Wanda was the Scarlet Witch since she's entered the MCU, but I never knew when she was going to actually take that title. And I thought it was cool that in this show, we see her not only taking the title, but we also get her a cool outfit to match. I love Paul Bettany as Jarvis and as Vision, and I was so happy to see him return as Vision again for this show. In this show, though, I noticed that this version of Vision kind of is like Wanda's subconscious. Like, Wanda thinks everything is perfect, and Vision does initially, but then as the show progresses, he quickly learns that something is wrong, and he is the first person to kind of like investigate what is actually going on in Westview. I thought it was cool how in the end Paul Bettany ends up playing like two different roles. It's interesting because I think that people often forget that Paul Bettany is like an OG when it comes to the MCU. He was in Iron Man playing Jarvis, and he's been in the MCU ever since. This man definitely deserves all of the respect. We come to find out that this is not the real Vision, but I think that this vision that she created really helps her understand herself and really helps her realize that she needs to come face to face with her grief and not run away from it. It was also cool to see Billy and Tommy, who played her kids, whose comic book fans will know as Wiccan and Speed. I really hope that we get to see them in future Marvel projects because I think that they are a really good addition to like the whole Wanda storyline, but they also have cool powers and really help the new Avengers. Kathryn Hahn killed her role in WandaVision. I've seen her in different TV shows and movies, and I always love to see what she'll bring to her characters. In this show, it was really interesting to see how, in the beginning, we think that she's trying to help Wanda and she's Wanda's friend, and eventually we come to find out that she's only really using Wanda because she wants to take her power. And I thought that she switched between those two, like identities with ease. It was funny to me because throughout the whole show, I knew that she was Agatha Harkness, but at the end, I was still surprised with the reveal. It's kind of interesting with her character because she's shown as kind of like a villain, but when you think about it realistically, you kind of wonder if she is. Like, yes, she was influencing some of the character's decisions, but she's not the one that created the hex, and she is not the one who was holding people captive. So you kind of see how she doesn't really fit into that line of like hero or villain. She's just kind of doing her own thing. I really hope we get to see more of Kathryn Hahn in the MCU. I think that Agatha Harkness was a good character to have in a show like this, and I think it would be a good character for the MCU as well, especially if they're going to be bringing in more magical beings into the universe. I think it would be great to have someone that has experience with magic. Also, Agatha all along was a freaking bop. I think that Tiana Paris did a great job as Monica Rambeau. The last time we saw Monica Rambeau was in Captain Marvel, and she was a little kid. So I really didn't know what to expect going into WandaVision because in this show we were seeing her as an adult. But I thought that Tiana Paris did a good job and made me really fall in love with the character. I liked how she was genuinely trying to help Wanda. I feel like her character understands grief, considering that during the time period of 5 years while she was gone because of the Thanos snap, her mom died. So when she came back, that's all she really knew was that her mother had died during this time, and she wasn't there to be with her mother during her last days. I think that during the show, she really wanted to help Wanda come to terms with her own grief because, she had experienced grief herself. I think that she was really trying to help Wanda, and she understood, that Wanda definitely was a threat because of what was going on, but she also understood kind of like the circumstances behind why Wanda did everything that she did. So she was really trying to help her and, help her come to terms with what was happening, but also come to terms with her past. I love how Tiana kind of portrayed Monica as someone who kind of seems like they have military training, but also someone who really wants to find the truth. Like she understood what Hayward was saying, but even though, Hayward was saying that Wanda was the villain, she decided to find that answer on her own and find out that Wanda actually wasn't the villain and that Hayward was the villain. I really hope that we get to see more Monica in the future because I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with her character and what's going to happen with her in Captain Marvel. But I also really want to know what's going to happen with her powers because in this show we got introduced to her powers, but they were kind of a mystery for most of the time that we were able to see her powers. So I really want to see more of her powers and learn more about her. Kat Dennings returns as Darcy Lewis, who we last saw in Thor Dark World, and she was also in the first Thor movie as well. And she was the addition to the show that I didn't know that I needed. I thought that Kat Dennings did perfect, and I really like her, like, really dry type of humor. But I was really enjoying seeing the return of Darcy Lewis, and I hope that she comes back in other movies because, we've seen her in the two Thor movies, and I was really excited to see her in this show, but I just didn't know what extent she would be in this show. But now she's a doctor, but she's still kind of funny, and it was really funny to see her interacting with the show and how she was really enjoying watching Wanda and Vision on TV, even though there was this crazy event going on with the Hex and people being trapped. Her becoming a doctor really just shows like how much growth that she's been through. And I also thought it was really cool how she is the one that figures out that Wanda is basically going through all these different sitcoms because she realizes that she's using this special type of frequency that appeared in old TV shows. So I really liked how she was brought in and that she was able to figure all that out. Jimmy Woo was a funny character, but also a character that we know will get shit done. I love seeing his return because in Ant-Man and the Wasp, I thought he was such a funny character as an FBI agent, but he was also trying to be on like good terms with Ant-Man. I think it was really cool to have him as like the one authority figure in the show, who we knew that we could trust because like all the other people, we were kind of like, I don't know how I feel about them because especially with Hayward because he was trash. One small thing that you may have missed is his close-up magic when he first meets with Monica. This is something that we saw him wanting to do at the end of the Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I thought it was really cool to see him not only do it in this movie, but he's perfected it. Because in the Ant-Man and the Wasp, if you remember at the end of it, he hadn't perfected it yet, but now this little callback was cool to see how he's been practicing and now he's got it. I thought that Darcy, Monica, and Jimmy were like the dream team. I love seeing them all work together, and I really hope we get to see them in future MCU projects come together again because I thought that they all complemented each other so well. I know some people were disappointed to see Evan Peters in this show, only for him not to be who they thought he would be. I was really excited to see Evan Peters in this show because I really like him as an actor ever since I started seeing him in American Horror Story. And I was really excited because I love what he brings to his characters. I loved seeing him in the episode that seemed like it took influence from like the show Malcolm in the Middle. In this episode, he really plays like the cool uncle, and I thought he did a really good job at that, even though he was really just being a puppet. But I really liked him in this role of being Quicksilver, but not the right Quicksilver. I think that Marvel does everything for a reason. So I think that they definitely included Evan Peters in this show for a reason. I definitely don't think that this is the last time that we'll see Evan Peters within the MCU. Even though I said that, I really hope that he does come back because I think that he is a great actor and I think that he can bring a lot to the MCU, whether that be his old version of Quicksilver that he did in the Fox movies or something completely new. I really hope to see a future with him in it. It was cool to see these commercials come up in the episodes that were filmed like TV shows. I thought it was really interesting how these commercials were basically some callbacks to stuff that had happened in Wanda's past, but it was also giving us hints on what was actually going on in the hex at the time or what was going on outside of the hex and people trying to reach in. For example, one of the commercials was like this little boy who, was starving on an island and then he gets food and then he can't eat it, and then he eventually dies and turns into bones. And then in that same episode, we kind of see how there is a big range that Wanda has the town in this hex. And so we often see the part where Wanda is focused on, and everyone there is alive and happy. But everyone outside of that area is pretty much frozen. So it's like they can eat if they were given food, but like they can't do anything else. So if they don't get free, they're going to die. And I thought that was interesting to see this in a commercial, but it was kind of like a hidden little message. My favorite part of this show was episode 8, which I think was a very pivotal episode because it's the episode where we realize, one, how Wanda got to Westview, but two, we also learn more about her trauma stemming from her original trauma when she was a kid and her parents got killed. It was an interesting episode, but it also brought up something else that, we had been seeing since Wanda's, introduction into the MCU that she was tested on with the one of the Infinity Stones. But this episode proved that Wanda's powers were there before. The Infinity Stone that she came in contact with pretty much just unlocked her powers even more and expanded her potential. This episode told us why she decided to use sitcoms to live her dream life in. It showed us how her powers manifested. It shows us how she joined Hydra after the death of her parents. It showed us how she grieved her brother after he was killed in Age of Ultron. It shows how she lost vision and then was snapped away during the Thanos snap and came back 5 years later only to find him dismembered and she couldn't feel him anymore. It's a scene in which we realize that Wanda is not a bad person. She's just been given a set of bad circumstances. It's such a pivotal scene to lay out her life and show us how much of an emotional toll these events have had on her life. It's a scene in which we realize how Wanda created the Hex. We find out that Wanda created the vision that we've been seeing. And we find out at this point that Hayward has been lying and saying that Wanda broke in and stole Vision this whole time, and he is not to be trusted. In this episode, this really made me realize how great of an actress Elizabeth Olsen was because she made me feel this connection to Wanda and, feel bad for all that Wanda has been through and feel this emotional connection to the character. In this episode, Wanda really starts to understand what is going on within this hex, but then she also realizes that she needs to come face to face with her past. And even though she has felt a lot of grief throughout her life, it is time for her to acknowledge that grief and start healing from it. In this episode, There is one scene that really stood out to me, and it's a scene where it looks like it's post Pietro's death in Age of Ultron, and Wanda is watching TV. She's watching a sitcom, and Vision comes in, and she's talking to him about being depressed and how it's kind of like a wave. You know, it comes in and then it goes, and it comes in and it goes, and she's just really overwhelmed with feelings. And Vision tells her, what is grief if not love persevering? I thought that that line itself was just the perfect line because it helped her understand her own grief. WandaVision had me on the edge of my seat for the 8 weeks that it aired. It was one of those shows where you watch an episode the day it comes out and you're already interested in what the next episode is going to be about. You know, you often see in MCU movies how there are other characters that are tied in or other storylines tied in. And I thought it was really nice that with WandaVision, it really took the time out to focus on Wanda and this world that she's created and with her perfect vision. And I thought it was just really cool. And I thought that, Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany had really good chemistry. And I thought it was just great, really, to just focus on their story, especially Wanda's and telling her backstory, because it was a character who we thought that we knew her backstory, but we came to find out that her backstory was a little bit different from what was told to us. WandaVision really upped the magic content for the MCU. It was filled with great visuals, a great story, and was bolstered by great performances. You should have already watched WandaVision, but if you have not, you need to go and sit down in front of a TV right now and go watch WandaVision. Thank you for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. If you have not subscribed, please do so you can keep up to date with more of my videos. But besides that, everyone stay safe, have fun, and goodbye.